One other thing I'd like to talk about in terms of i's, I to the positive 1 is, of course, I. And I squared is negative 1. What if we had I cubed? Well, I cubed is actually I squared times I. So it's a negative 1 times I. It's just a negative I. I to the 4th is I squared times I squared, which is negative 1 times a negative 1, which is a positive 1. If I went on to I to the 5th, I could write that as I times I to the 4th, which is going to be I times 1, which is just I. I to the 6th would be I to the 4th times I squared, squared. So it's a positive 1 times a negative 1 is negative 1. So you notice that this and this match, and this and this match, and this will continue. As a matter of fact, if I went backwards, if I had I to the 0, anything raised to the power 0 is 1. So I to the 0 goes with I to the 4th, and so on and so forth. What if we had I to the 15th? If I wrote that as many I to the 4ths as I could, since I to the 4th is positive 1, so that's the easiest thing to work with. So we've got 4, 8, 12, I need 3 more to give me 15. 4, 4, 4, and 3 add up to 15. So this is 1 times 1 times 1 times I cubed was a negative I. So it's just equal to negative I. Any power of I is going to be either I, negative 1, negative I, or positive 1, depending on whether the exponent, if the exponent will divide by 4, it's going to be a positive 1. If it'll divide evenly by 4, if it's a multiple of 4. So I to the 0, I to the 4th, I to the 8th, I to the 12th, etc., are all equal to 1. I to the 1st, I to the 5th, I to the 9th, I to the 13th are just all going to equal I to the 1st, which is just I. Now, the trick to doing this without having to write it all out is to just divide it by 4 and then see what the remainder is. If you'll divide the exponent by 4, and find the remainder. Remember 4th grade division when you first were told you could divide, 17 by 4, not just 16? If the remainder is 0, then it equals 1. If the remainder is 1, for instance, if you're dividing 5, 9, 13 by 4, if the remainder is 1, it's equal to I. If the remainder is 2, then it's equal to I squared, which makes it a negative 1, sorry, had to think. I squared is negative 1. And if the remainder is 3, then it's equal to a negative I. So you go 1, I, negative 1, negative I. So if we wanted to find out what I to the 44th is, you'd say 4 into 44 is 11 with a remainder of 0. So since it's the same as I to the 0, it's equal to positive 1. If we had I to the 53, we would divide 4 into 53. 4 goes into 5 once. 4 goes into 13 3 times with a remainder of 1. So I to the 53 is equal to I to the 1st, which is equal to just positive I. I don't have to put plus.